A series of brutal murders occurred in a short span of time. The victims were slaughtered in various different methods, each unique, but all resulted in extremely painful deaths. The situation became even more horrifying when the police discovered that the murderer was following the 7 deadly sins, including gluttony, greed, sloth, lust, pride, envy, and wrath, believing he had the power of God to punish the sinners to fulfill his mission. The entire city plunged into fear. The media was thrown into chaos due to the severity of the case, wondering why such a brutal killer could escape the notice of the investigation team, questioning if all humans inherently carry sins from birth and deserve punishment. The case is always present on the list of the best psychological crime films of all time, Seven by director David Fincher, which leaves us bewildered and questioning how to maintain our humanity and integrity in the face of primal desires. Today, let's explore the film that has caused many viewers to lose sleep and dare not watch it again. Seven starts with a continuous, gloomy reign over the nameless city where crime is rampant. Veteran detective Somerset, only a week away from early retirement due to exhaustion from investigative work, is quickly replaced by young detective David Mills. The new detective gets involved when a report of a gruesome murder occurs. An obese man was forcibly fed until his stomach burst, literally dying from suffocation in a plate of spaghetti and his own vomit, a truly horrific death. The next day, the city's most famous lawyer was also brutally executed. This time, the murderer forced the victim to cut a pound of his own flesh, placing it on a scale next to the corpse with the word greed hinting ominously. Somerset returns to the previous day's crime scene
Bên
and
cạnh
using
cái
his
xác là
insight,
chữ greed,
discovers the word
tham lam.
gluttony written behind the refrigerator, confirming that the killer is acting according to the 7 deadly sins as explained by the experienced and insightful detective. The murders continue with each new day bringing another body found, leaving the police and detectives powerless as the perpetrator toys with their minds and tortures each victim painfully before death. The killer also meticulously arranges the crime scenes as if to send a message that would make anyone witnessing it tremble with nausea. The lazy victim was tied to the bed and only injected with chemicals enough to keep him alive until he ate his own tongue from hunger. The proud victim, a beautiful model, had her face disfigured so painfully that she ended her life with sleeping pills. The lustful victim, a prostitute, was tied to a bed and stabbed with a bizarre, cruel tool. Everything starts to clarify when one detective follows a list of library patrons and identifies a suspect named John Doe, who had borrowed books related to the 7 deadly sins. The detectives go to John's house where shots are fired. Ms. quickly chases after him, unexpectedly getting knocked out in an alley, but spared by the killer before Somerset could arrive just in time. Frustrated, Mills kicks in the door, ignoring Somerset's advice to wait for a warrant, and inside they discover that the suspect is actually a freelance journalist who had been photographing the crime scenes related to the lazy sin, and his house is a mini museum displaying hundreds of photos documenting the torture of the victims and numerous journals expressing John Doe's hatred for humanity. The next day, John Doe surrenders himself at the police station and announces that he has completed his mission to eradicate the 7 sins. The last 2 victims are only revealed under the condition that Somerset and Mills accompany him to the desert. Somerset and Mills, representing the good qualities of diligence, patience, kindness, and humility, are also embodiments of justice, but their contrasting personalities make for an interesting dynamic. One at the end of his career, disillusioned with life in a wicked city and ready to retire, while the other is just starting, full of enthusiasm and hope to change the world. However, after more than 3 years of relentless crime, Ms. has become desperate, yet desperation does not equate to indifference. Despite investigators and even the police chief treating murder cases as routine, Somerset is the only one who raises moral questions, still shocked by the brutality of crimes no matter how many times he witnesses them. Although they do not get along well, Ms. sends Somerset information he found in the library about the murderer. Somerset accepts an invitation to dinner from Tracy, Mrs. Wife, and sees hope in their fragile little home and the simple love between the two young people who inadvertently wandered into a world filled with crime. Mrs. Ambition and dedication even led them to buy a house right next to a train track, causing their apartment to shake every 5 minutes, foreshadowing that this land would disrupt their happy family life. Unlike David, Miss Somerset always maintains a calm and objective attitude, continually questioning the meaning of life and the nature of evil when unable to find answers from those around him. After a time, Somerset turns to knowledge for answers, appearing to be the only one wise and composed enough to grasp the psyche of John Doe. Both detest and are disillusioned with the moral degradation of society, but their chosen paths are completely different. Somerset continues to nurture compassion and dedication to his profession, refusing to accept indifference as a trait necessary for survival in a chaotic world. Somerset and Ms. chose love as something worth continuing to fight for. John Doe, the murderer, grants himself the power of God. Unlike typical thrillers where the villain is caught at the end of the movie, John reveals himself long before the final act, actively becoming the antagonist that haunts many viewers. He is extremely intelligent, persistent, and aware of what he is doing, finding the victims exactly as he wanted, and the police only catch him because he surrenders himself, having devised a plan to end his sermon in a terrifying manner. However, from the beginning of the film, director David Fincher takes us deep into John's mind. He meticulously shaves his hands and writes in his journal, researching the crime books of John, prepared carefully and skillfully over a long time. Not as a sudden act, making one ponder the hatred and twisted soul that had been nurtured for a long time by an intellectual. Not just an average murderer. An intelligent and composed killer is always more frightening than a common criminal, as Somerset once commented when discovering the victim of sloth. Keeping him alive for a year required an astonishing will, money, time, and technique. John Doe, with all his madness, also considers himself an artist, a missionary, and it cannot be denied that he has diligently learned many skills for the grand purpose of his life. Desperate over the justice system's indifference to rampant crime in the streets, he becomes enraged to the point of madness, believing that this place does not deserve to be saved. Opting to become a vigilante rather than choosing the path, he decides to strike a powerful blow with high-profile cases to be heard and followed. Initially, he sees himself as representing the sin of wrath, the anger that leads him to torture and punish others. But his plan changes when he meets Ms., the impulsive and decisive detective. He will replace himself, excited by this turn of events, happy for the detective to witness his two final masterpieces. Ultimately, John realizes his true sin is envy, the most terrible crime, the source of all other evils. He envies the calm, optimistic lives of ordinary people, as the world around becomes increasingly worse, which is why he eagerly anticipates his own death. Perhaps besides God, he is one of the few who can arrange fate and manipulate others, including an experienced detective like Somerset, who could not predict his overly clever and brutal move. Right at 7 p.m. on Saturday, a courier delivers a scheduled package to the desert. Somerset opens it and is horrified to see the head of Tracy, Missy's wife. John toys with Missy's mind by describing his process of committing the crime and revealing that Tracy had pleaded with him to spare her for the sake of their unborn child. Looking at the painful expression in Missy's eyes, John knows he has won. This scene displays all the cunning and ability to read human nature supremely well by John. He looks after Ms. rather than Ms. After recounting the story, he knows Tracy is worried about giving birth, lonely, only confiding in Somerset, and the two have been hiding this from Ms., who is losing sleep over his job. In the end, Miss shoots John, turning him into the sin of envy and himself into the sin of wrath. That moment is a transition representing how evil has spread into the protagonist, here David Ms., who thought he could make a difference in the city, but ends up accepting a bitter end. He kills John as an act of pure revenge, unable to endure the fury tearing at him. In that moment of despair, Miss becomes the perfect representative of the last sin, exactly as John wanted. Whether John kills any more people or how long he survives no longer matters because he believes what he does will be remembered forever due to its horror, deeply ingrained in the minds of the contemporary people and passed on orally like a terrifying legend of a demon ready to execute anyone who commits a sin the Lord has warned against. The Nameless City, a miniature anti-paradise world and a haunting conclusion. Seven becomes timeless, not just because of its subject matter or famous ending, but also because director David Fincher has excellently constructed a dark, chilling world always drenched in torrential rain. He does not establish a specific location. This place could be Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, or any modern metropolis with countless skyscrapers, low-angle shots tightly wrapping people in a concrete and steel maze with no escape, damp corridors, seedy underground bars, and rundown buildings devoid of sunlight. The only light able to penetrate the night coming from the detectives' flashlights. But similarly, like the light in the victim's apartment, they are still just weak, hopeless glimmers in the dark night. According to critic Brandon Hodges, the atmosphere of certain death and decay is successfully created using a yellow color palette of rotten design, settings so real that one feels the need to wash their hands after touching any surface. And even the walls in Missy's apartment are stained with old watermarks. David Fincher has created a terrestrial hell that many viewers associate with a city of crime that no one would want to live in. A world where the sound of police sirens, gunfire, round-the-clock arrests, and dead bodies on the street are ordinary. Where a murderer can act without anyone caring or being too afraid to speak up. The lazy victim was tortured for a year, but his landlord never knew because he only needed to see the rent paid on time every month. Both Somerset and Tracy share a fear that this city is entirely unsuitable for raising a child. Not just because of the criminals, but also because the justice system is indirectly making life here worse with its indifference and resignation to evil. Many dead unable to close their eyes, and anyone who witnesses a crime will suffer a lifelong haunting. However, the man threatened with a sex toy-attached star to have relations with the victim of the sin of lust. Although it sparked controversy due to its brutality, the film could not have a happy ending after everything that had happened before. Entertainment Weekly's journalist Will Robinson believes that this unexpected ending makes the work not just a typical detective movie, but also carries deep moral and humanistic significance as the enforcer of justice and the villains strip off their everyday disguises to confront each other with their humanity in a deserted wilderness. Mrs. Wife is a rare, gentle brightness in the heavy atmosphere of the entire film. She helps her husband and Somerset become closer colleagues. Sadly, though, that light was extinguished even though the artificial rain stopped when John died. But this land, as well as the lives of Miss and Somerset, have been cursed forever in hell. A very bleak ending that breaks the mold deeply embedded in Hollywood detective movie scripts. Up to that point, Seven is the scariest movie ending since George Sluicer's The Vanishing, and will always stand in the list of the most complex works of the serial killer film genre. Not only reversing the fate of David Mills, but also causing Somerset's life plan to take a completely different direction. He does not allow himself to rest and decides to continue dedicating himself to the law as a way to carry on Mrs. Hope to change the world. A man now completely shattered in a painful ending where darkness seems to forever swallow the city, and it's hard to reach out and find a safe way out. David Fincher still tries to send a message to anyone feeling that this life is too hopeless with the closing words of the character Somerset. Regardless, this world still deserves our struggle to make it better, right? That's the end of the video. What are your thoughts after watching this memorable work? Please leave your comments below for Love Movie Recaps, and until next time, goodbye and see you again.